there, welcome again to the ISOC speaker series. I'm here with Tamir Israel from CIPPIC in Ottawa. And Tamir, could you talk a little bit about CIPPIC and what your role is here?
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me as part of the series. My name is, as you said, is Tamir Israel, and I'm staff lawyer with the Samuelson Glushko Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic. What we are is a law and technology clinic based at the University of Ottawa, and what we do is we try to make sure that public interest voices are heard when legal and policy issues arise at the intersection of law and technology. So what that means in more general terms is that what we find in many contexts is that whenever the law is applied, or whenever the legal or policymakers are looking at addressing a new issue that has a technological component, often there's a lot of there's often a lot of challenges involved with addressing the specific technological aspects of that medium, and I can give some examples later. And this often, and when these decisions are made without a full understanding of the technical as well as the legal and the policy aspects of the problem, we often get outcomes that are really bad for the general public and for the internet at large. So what we try to do at CIPPIC is to make sure that there's somebody in there making sure that that public interest view is heard and articulated in a way that makes sure that it's taken into account.
Okay. What's your opinion on how well the public interest voice is expressed right now within Canadian policymaking?
I think there is a lot of I think that there is that Canada does have a vibrant policy environment for technological issues. I think there is definitely room for a better informed public debate on a number of issues. And again, a lot of the problems. The reason why this is a problem, not just in Canada but around the world, is that because the issues are often very technical, it's often very difficult to properly express what the concerns are in a way that both policymakers and the general public understand. So I think the debate currently is the state of the policy making in Canada is quite good, but I think often things slip through the cracks with potentially very poor outcomes for the general public or for the internet at large. And so things are good, but more can be done, I guess, is maybe the best way to summarize that.
Okay. From the work that you're doing here at the center, what would you say you've identified as being the biggest issues facing Canadians, specifically the ones that are, pose the most threat, that need the most public awareness?
So definitely, I think one of the biggest issues is surveillance, and particularly surveillance as set up by the government, as conducted by the government. I was talking before about how technology often changes the way that policies are applied in challenging ways, and I think in the surveillance context we see this a lot. We have the technological changes allow the government to do a lot more than it ever could before, and the laws and the policy don't necessarily catch up to that in ways that make sure that the checks and balances are in the same spot. So whereas before we had rules of the road that basically said, in terms of protecting privacy, the government can do this and this and that, the underlying understanding behind those rules was that there are a lot of practical limitations that will play alongside those legal and policy rules to make sure that the government cannot do whatever it wants in terms of invading the privacy of citizens. But with the technological changes, a lot of that is kind of fallen through the wayside, and the legal rules and the policy rules have just not caught up with the technological changes. So what that means is that the government is able to collect more information on individuals without them knowing than it has at any stage before in history, really. It's able to analyze it more, and it's able to better and more accurately, and it's able to make decisions based on it. Not necessarily better decisions, but more decisions often the decisions themselves are not as good because they're based on automated decision-making processes. So the outcome of that whole the outcome of that of all those factors is often is very detrimental to individuals, and down the road it could be very detrimental to society. So I think that's and the challenge is understanding exactly how that's detrimental. So for example, because the way that it harms our social fabric is not a very direct one, so it doesn't mean that me personally I'm going to experience, you know, some very dramatic effect on my life because all my personal information was collected by the government and used for various purposes. But it can harm the broader social fabric. It could mean that, you know, reporters are not able to do their job more effectively because they can't speak to whistleblowers through communications mediums because the government is, you know, the person blowing the whistle is blowing the whistle on the government, and the reporter and the government is able to track that interaction. It could mean that, you know, we've seen in other countries, you know, in the United States as recently as late into the last decade and during the Cold War, that when the FBI was given sort of a blank check in terms of what it could collect on its citizens, you know, politicians were being blackmailed, judges were the activities of, you know, judges were being surveyed to influence, you know, presumably to influence outcomes. A lot of people who were, you know, had different political viewpoints, which were legitimate and important to a vibrant democracy, were being spied upon. And we're seeing right now with a lot of the revelations regarding, you know, the scope of where the government has gone with its surveillance activities, that a lot of these same kind of concerns are recurring, and that we're getting, whereas like some laws came in place near the end of the last century to pull that surveillance capacity back, we're getting back to that spot, to that place. So I think that is a really big issue that a lot of people don't necessarily understand the dimensions of, but can have some pretty serious implications. Another problematic issue is that I think is really big for Canadians and again engages a lot of these highly technical aspects that are challenging for policymakers is basically just how you deal with there's a lot of related telecommunications related issues that deal with, you know, how internet is accessed, at what rate, and by what rules. And one of these core issues relates to net neutrality, which is a really complex set of principles that basically say that, you know, when you're talking about the internet and accessing content on the internet, the entity, you know, whether it's your internet service provider, essentially your internet service provider, whether it's through your home connection or your connection on your telephone, is supposed to be neutral with respect to the content that it's providing you. So it shouldn't be act as a gatekeeper. It shouldn't choose, I like this company better than that company, so you're going to be able to access this company's content better than this other company's or more easily than this other company's content. It should just be neutral, and the reason why that historically that wasn't sort of an architectural principle of the internet. It was actually built into the way that the internet was designed, that the entities that were connecting you to the internet couldn't really interfere too much with the type of content that you were receiving. But we've gotten to a point where the technology has evolved, and service providers are able to, and increasingly are, using their network to treat different types of content and content from different types of providers in different ways. So what that could mean, if net neutrality rules are not sort of rigorously adopted in ways that prevent this type of discrimination between content, it could mean that the vibrant environment. I like to think of the internet, at least in its early days, as an innovation incubator, in the sense that it was a platform where anyone could say what they wanted, anyone could create their little innovative website, application, whatever, and just put it on there and have an immediate audience, and based on that audience, so that you have like almost a perfect sort of competitive environment where all types of innovation went out, whether it's funny cat pictures or things that are more sophisticated, like gaming applications or videos on YouTube. The underlying rationale behind what makes that possible is the fact that everyone has equal access to everyone, and when you get rid of those underlying conditions through having gatekeepers that decide, I like this type of content better than that type of content, that environment kind of goes away, because we have platforms that have evolved, like YouTube, which is fantastic, but had YouTube evolved, started to come around in an environment that didn't have those types of conditions built into it, where the providers couldn't act as gatekeepers, it may never have gotten it may never have gotten established. We wouldn't have YouTube, because it would have been charged out of, it would have, service provider would have gone to YouTube when it was first, developing and hadn't really become a profitable endeavor yet, and said, oh, you're generating a lot of traffic for us, we want you to start paying us, for reaching our customers.
So let me ask you about going on about the net neutrality issue in a Canadian context. Is this even more sensitive in Canada because you have so much cross-ownership? So you have Bell owning CTV, you have Rogers owning magazine chains and City TV and so on. There's this high level of media concentration in the hands of ISPs. Is this something that is more sensitive in Canada than elsewhere, perhaps?
I think so. I mean, we have a good set of rules from the CRTC on net neutrality in Canada that still need some work on the enforcement side to make sure that they're followed rigorously, and then also they're now being tested in ways that they haven't been before by these heavily concentrated entities. And the problem with the concentrated entities that we have in Canada is that you have a really strong incentive by companies that provide internet service and also own, things like television stations and television distribution, where the real incentive is to make sure that you're not spending too much time watching YouTube, but spending more time watching, their tube. I'm not going to mention any specific TV channels, just to remain neutral. But so there is a cross incentive there. There's also a problem now that we're shifting, where a lot of traditional broadcasters of television are shifting their means of distribution. So they're trying to make it so that they're trying to capture your time on your tablet and your phone, so that time is also spent watching their tube or their channels. And one of the specific issues that we're dealing with now, for example, is that Bell, one of these companies is offering its own like a mobile application that has its channels in ways that are making it harder for competing providers of video like YouTube and Netflix, for example, to compete on equal footing on the mobile service platform that it offers. So I would say that and then given that the levels of concentration in Canada and cross integration in Canada of companies that the primary companies that provide internet service and also broadcasting and radio are a lot higher in Canada. So that was actually that raised a lot of net neutrality issues, as well as a number of other competitive issues, which was going to be my next bullet, which is just dealing with media concentration in general. This is becoming a problem in Canada. Like, ever since the merger of Bell Canada and Astral last year, we no longer have a major independent broadcaster or ISP essentially in Canada, which means that we have 3 or 4 really big, maybe 5 depending on the specifics, really big companies that most of which have a foot in the broadcasting, like they own TV programs, they own mobile phone services, and they also own traditional home internet services as well as home phone services. And it's the same companies that are providing all of these services. And that creates a lot of cross incentives, not just in the net neutrality context that we were talking before, where the company in providing you internet has the incentive to prevent content that competes with its traditional television content from really getting a foothold. But across the board, it means that these companies have immense market share, and they're really able to leverage their their I don't want to say dominance, but their very sort of significant heft across a number of services to keep the prices really high. Use it. Hold on to unpopular billing methods such as usage-based billing with internet when there's not necessarily any necessity for it, things like that.
Okay. So
and this hurts the broader internet ecosystem because when you have usage-based billing taking hold as opposed to other types of unlimited services, people are discouraged from using the internet for where we should be encouraging that type of use.
Okay. What would you see, in fact, in this whole world of decreasing net neutrality or threats to net neutrality? What role do bodies like the CBC and provincial educational authorities have? Do you see they have an active role to play, or are they just going to get caught up in this?
It's interesting with CBC because they don't have the ability to, they don't have the access to all these distribution channels that some of their competing broadcasters have. I think they're going to actually have a problem because if so for example, I was talking before about an ISP that offers its own its own content on an application for its customers on mobile in ways that no other competitor can. CBC is locked out of that. So when they've already started doing it, when they start transitioning to getting their content out onto the new platforms, onto the internet, onto customers who are on mobile platforms, they're going to have a hard time doing it because they don't have the advantage that these the content that they're competing with has. So, and a good example of this is in the UK, the BBC, where they have a lot more competition on these things. The BBC was one of the first entities to really get onto the digital medium, and they were incredibly successful. They put out they had an application for folks in the UK to view all their content online and stream it online, and they were one of the first ones to get on there as the UK public broadcaster. CBC is going to have a much harder time getting there.
But even in the case of the BBC doesn't own any ISPs in Britain, so they may still face this challenge.
Yeah. The types of, historically, within the UK, within the United Kingdom, because there is more competition among ISPs and because the ISPs themselves are not as vertically integrated, some of these problems just haven't come up as frequently. There still have been problems, but they haven't come up kind of as frequently and as robustly as they have in Canada. So, so I think that kind of helps. They're definitely going to run into problems down the road for sure, because now, even within the competitive landscape that they have there, a lot of ISPs and mobile providers are starting to look at putting in some of these alternative models. But the problem is worse in Canada, where the concentration levels and the cross-channel concentration levels are so high.
Okay. One last question before moving on this issue. In Canada, we've got a precedent of equal access on cable. So you have forced access that if a company is going to offer a cable signal to its subscribers, there are certain stations that it has to have mandatory coverage.
Right.
Does this create a precedent, perhaps, of forcing a kind of new net neutrality that could make its way to the internet, that you can't, there are certain channels, there are certain carriers or whatever that you just can't keep off? Following the lead that Canada already has made policy-wise, in forcing cable companies to carry certain channels, do you see that spilling over into the internet policy?
Well, I think when you're transitioning from a traditional broadcasting model where the core impediment is scarcity of access, like you have X number of fixed channels historically, so you have sort of guaranteed slots for specific types of content and specific types of providers. Transitioning from that into the digital environment where the challenge is almost the opposite. You have limitless access. The problem is you have an attention problem. Attention scarcity as opposed to space scarcity. I think we're going to need to. So the old solution to the space scarcity was to require providers to carry certain channels. The solution to the space scarcity is going to have to be a little bit different, but maybe based on the same principles, which is it's going to have to require. One solution to it could be that could buttress sort of an equal access type of principle in the sense that you would say, you can't impede the CBC's access to its customers, but I think it's going to need to require a little bit I think there's going to be some needs for some additional types of tools. Like we're going to need to find ways to highlight the CBC app or whatever to make sure that people are aware of it. So I think there's going to be a bigger education role and a bigger sort of funding role potentially to make sure that things like CBC and other types of Canadian content are sort of able to overcome the attention deficit, which is the problem in the online environment, where there's so much out there that how do you make sure people are aware that the great Canadian content is there. I think that needs to we still need to figure out how to do that best, but certainly not the way to do it is to make sure that these types of entities are suffering from an impediment in getting a competitor, are suffering from the ability to provide their content on equal footing as the incumbent ISPs who happen to own the mobile as well as the home internet and all these other distribution channels.
Okay, so going beyond what we've talked about already on net neutrality, going beyond the issues of privacy and surveillance, are there other things here at the center that you can see either as issues that haven't been getting the attention they should, or anything else that you think needs to be brought to the attention of our members and the Canadian public in general?
I mean, we definitely do a lot of work on a variety of issues. I think the internet governance question in general doesn't get enough attention within Canada, and that's it's kind of a meta question. It's a question not necessarily about what we do with online conduct, but the broader question of how do we make decisions about how the internet should be governed. And this issue does have a lot of it gets a lot of play in other jurisdictions, but in Canada it's kind of been, we tend to view our internet policy issues in isolation, so as they pop up. So for example, you'll have, a surveillance issue pops up and that gets dealt with on its own, and then, a net neutrality issue comes up and that gets dealt with on its own. There's a lot of technological specific issues that tend to recur, and a lot of jurisdictions have, and internationally, a lot of internet related policy issues are now being dealt with in a more cohesive manner. So, and that involves making sure that there is maybe more discussion before new legislative or even or even just specific steps by certain actors are taken, that there's a broader range of debate on those issues, that there's more resources out there to make sure that people are able to participate in those debates, that all stakeholders are brought to the table and all issues are discussed. A lot of places are looking at what the rules of the road specific to this type of policy making are, and I think in Canada that's a discussion that hasn't occurred really as rigorously, and people are not even necessarily aware that issue is on the table. So I think that's an issue that I think could use a little bit more discussion in Canada. The question of how do we make decisions about technology specific policies in ways that don't lead to bad outcomes. So I think that's another one that's worth highlighting. As well as, what else? Other ones? Affordability and access is another one of internet services. Part of this, we've seen in other jurisdictions that, really sort of dynamic and comprehensive solutions to a lot of the digital access issues have come about. In Canada, we haven't necessarily put together a comprehensive agenda for how to deal with making sure that everybody has internet access at affordable rates and at rates that can participate in the digital economy completely. The government has signaled that it will put out a digital economy plan soon, so that might be one sort of step in the direction toward resolving a lot of these issues, and a lot of the debate can maybe revolve around that. But I think that is another issue that needs more attention. How do we, we have some how do we make sure that everybody, the goal should be everybody, in whether you're living in rural or urban, you have access to affordable internet and at reasonable speeds and rates of quality, because because it's an empowering medium, and more of our services, essential services, and more of our lives are migrating online. So the more people are getting locked out of this ecosystem, and in Canada, we were early on in the internet age. We were very quick. We were one of the first ones to really get online, and our when you look at the figures of how many people are online in countries around the world and compare Canada, in the early sort of half a decade of the internet, we were world leaders, but we sort of stalled. We never really we stalled at that point, and now we're really falling behind our OECD, like our counterparts in economically developed countries. So I think we really need a strong strategy for how to make sure that all Canadians are participating in this digital economy and digital society, and are able to do so sort of comprehensively. The last one that I will flag is digital literacy, technical literacy. This is an area where it cuts across all our policy areas that we deal with. The fact that a lot of the issues that we deal with are very technical and hard to really grasp the full impact of. But there's a broader literacy question, which is like people do need to have a higher level of technical skill. And this is becoming because so much of our lives and activities are migrating to digital mediums. Understanding people will need a higher understanding of how things work. Not we don't need everybody to be engineers, but people should have we need to find ways of making sure people have a better understanding of what a cookie is, for example. How it works, what it can do, what browser settings are, not what they are, but what the specific browser settings, do, and what to look for when you're adjusting browser settings, things like that. All these things are going to have increasing, when you pick up a new mobile phone, there's, 5 layers of menus there, and you should be able to understand at the very least what they all do, and all of these things are the digital literacy needs to be, I think, higher in Canada, and I think because I think people do need to. I think we need to make sure that starting at an early age, and also for those of us who are already past that early education age, that there are resources and tools out there to explain to people how things work, how the things that they're using to govern their lives actually work. I think that'll lead to a richer digital participation, richer and better quality of digital participation.
Cool. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.